Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining Congresswoman Jacobs' fifth town hall of the year. We are grateful to have you all here. My name is Amy Kuhn. I serve as the Congresswoman's Chief of Staff. I'll be off camera for the duration of the event, but I will be moderating. We are very fortunate, in addition to Congresswoman Jacobs, to have California Attorney General Rob Bonta joining us today. The Attorney General will be on this town hall for the first 30 minutes. So as we sort through all your questions, we'll be prioritizing ones that are directed to him first. Congresswoman Jacobs will, of course, also chime in along the way. In the interest of time, we will go ahead and get started. Let's see, make sure the Attorney General can also join us now. Fabulous. Welcome, sir. All right, we will go ahead and get started. Congresswoman Jacobs, over to you for opening thoughts.
Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this town hall. I'm super excited to have you all. As you know, we try and host a town hall every month, and we change it in format to accommodate as many people as possible. So next month, we'll be doing an in-person town hall during the last week of July, so we'll send out more details. But I'm really excited that tonight we have California Attorney General Rob Bonta. He's really been on the front lines of holding the Trump administration accountable and pushing back on what they're doing. And I'll turn it over to him in just a minute, but I wanted to give a quick update on what we're working on in DC. I know many of you are alarmed by the tactics of ICE and other federal immigration authorities here in San Diego and LA, across the country. I am too. Obviously, we saw what happened here in South Park at Buena Forqueta, where agents wore riot gear, tossed flashbangs and smoke grenades during the dinner rush. And, just to go after a couple of busboys who were trying to do their job. They'd had no criminal record. And this could have easily hurt people. So immediately after the raid happened, I spoke with the HSI agent in charge and communicated that these tactics were unnecessary and were bad for public safety. And I have to say, I was so inspired by the response from the San Diego community and the outpouring of love and support that we saw for our immigrant community. As you all know, Trump has sent around 2,000 National Guard troops and 800 Marines to LA. I, as a member of the Armed Services Committee, have been trying to determine what authorities they're using. It is currently illegal. It is illegal for the military to be used for civilian law enforcement. We saw a Marine detain a civilian over the weekend. And, one of the things I've been doing is really trying to make sure we understand what kind of training they have gotten. The Marines have only gotten 4 days of training for non-lethal methods. The president is saying he's doing this because of a so-called invasion in LA. But last week, I asked the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he confirmed to me that there is no invasion in LA. So it's clear that this is just a power grab on the part of Donald Trump. So look, overall, we know that all of this is not about actually going after criminals. They're showing up at schools and churches and hospitals and restaurants and even courthouses, like we saw here in San Diego. But we're going to keep doing our job and doing our oversight responsibility, introducing legislation, and then, of course, working with amazing folks like our Attorney General on lawsuits. And so with that, Attorney General Bonta, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Congressmember, and honored to be here with all of you, and very excited again for the time we're going to spend together, and grateful that you are shared constituents of both me and the Congressmember, as someone who has the honor and privilege of representing all of the great state of California. First and foremost, I want to say to all of the Congressional District 51 constituents watching today, you are lucky to have Sara Jacobs in your corner in DC fighting for you. I'm grateful to have her as a partner that I can fight side by side with, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to be here to talk about the actions that we're taking at the California Department of Justice to protect your rights, your freedoms, and future amidst the challenges that are coming out from the federal administration. The sort of silver lining is that we had a good idea of what to expect before President Trump took office. We had been preparing for what might come, but we had hoped this second term might be different, that he wouldn't trample over the Constitution, that he wouldn't blatantly disregard our rights and protections under the law. But unfortunately, that has not been the case. Regardless of what comes from the White House and the Republican members of Congress, I want to take a moment to reassure you, I'm not here to pick a fight, but I'm not backing down from one either. And I know the same goes for Congressmember Jacobs. So far, in 22 weeks, I've had to sue the Trump administration 26 times, more than one a week. Just last week, alongside Governor Newsom, I sued President Trump and asked the court for a temporary restraining order after the administration unlawfully federalized 4,000 California National Guard troops for 60 days and separately deployed an additional 700 Marines. The orders federalizing the National Guard were unnecessary and counterproductive. It's clear the president is looking for any pretense to place military forces on American streets to intimidate and quiet those who disagree with him. We were granted the temporary restraining order, which held that we're likely to succeed in our claim that the president unlawfully deployed the California National Guard to Los Angeles and directed the administration to return control of the Guard to Governor Newsom as their appropriate commander-in-chief. Shortly after, the Ninth Circuit Court stayed or stopped temporarily the decision, meaning it paused the order while it reviews the Trump administration's appeal. Nonetheless, we remain confident in the strength of our case and believe the law is on our side. The other lawsuits I've filed aim to hold the federal administration accountable, and they vary in focus, from challenging President Trump's attempt to end birthright citizenship, a constitutional right, and his threats to freeze federal funding, to the decimation of funds that support medical and public health research, and allowing DOJ to unlawfully access Americans' personal information, not to mention Elon Musk's unlawful exercise of power in his commanding of DOJ. So we cover a lot of ground in our lawsuits. We're active on all fronts. Wherever we determine the Trump administration's actions are illegal, we act. We've sued for civil rights violations like Trump's executive order attempting to impose sweeping voter restrictions across the nation. We've sued to protect our environment, like when we challenged the Trump administration's unlawful attempt to use the Congressional Review Act to attack California's long-standing clean vehicle standards. And instead of doing their job, House and Senate Republicans failed to check executive overreach, decided to help dismantle the balance of power and undercut states' rights. We've also sued to protect our workers, like when we challenged numerous federal agencies for conducting an illegal mass firing of federal probationary employees. And those are just some of the cases. Again, there's 26 of them, so the list goes on. We don't expect the president's barrage of unlawful, chaotic, disruptive executive orders and actions to slow down, which means neither will our work ahead. The president has proven time and time again that he has no problem flat out ignoring the laws that Congress has enacted and plowing ahead with his own hateful agenda in clear violation of the constitutional guarantee of a separation of powers. Republicans in Congress have made it clear they're just fine with letting that happen. And fortunately, we still have some state representatives that believe in the rule of law and are standing up for what's right, like Congresswoman Jacobs and her Democratic colleagues. That's why my team is working around the clock, watching and monitoring everything that the president and his administration do. And you can be sure if the president breaks the law, we'll go to court to stop him. If he violates the Constitution, we'll see him in court. California DOJ will continue to protect, defend, and serve every single Californian, and will do so with partners like Congressmember Jacobs. It's going to be a long 4 years, but we'll get through it together. A united front ready to protect our people, defend our rights, and lead with our California values. Here in the Golden State, progress will prevail. Now, I understand you might have some questions for me, so I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you both. All right. Our first question comes from Kathleen C. She asks, can California legally withhold tax monies from the federal government if President Trump continues to act unlawfully?
In my opinion, California does not have the authority to legally withhold tax funding from the federal government because of the president's unlawful actions. I know this is often talked about, often thought about. I've thought about it. I thought about it during Trump 1.0. And keep in mind, I say this position, state my position, despite the fact that we contribute in California far more in taxes to the federal government than we receive back in federal spending. We're a donor state. We give $83 billion more to the federal government than they give back to us. So the equities I know are very compelling and persuasive, but the law doesn't provide for a way to do this. If we were taking a page out of the president's playbook, we'd illegally withhold that funding. But instead, I'm focused on continuing to file lawsuits that challenge unlawful federal actions, as we've done again 26 times, the rule of law, is the bedrock of our democracy, of our economy, of our rights, of our freedoms, of everything that makes our country great. And we can't allow anyone, and yes, that includes the President of the United States, to bully us into obedience and silence. So I want you to know, no matter what is thrown at us from Washington, D.C., I'll be here upholding the law, pursuing justice, and showing bullies and bad actors that I won't back down from the fight for what's right.
Well, now you guys all see why I say we are so lucky to have Attorney General Bonta leading the fight for us in California, because as he said, we are a donor state. We give more money to the federal government than we receive. And I think, it's on all of us in your federal delegation to try and figure out how we can make sure those tax dollars are spent well and spent justly. And obviously, we're not seeing a lot of that from this administration.
All right. The next question is asked by Jesse R. Attorney General Bonta, you covered this in your remarks a little bit, but there is a two-part question, so I'll go ahead and read the whole thing. What can, will, or have you done about Trump bypassing Governor Newsom and activating the National Guard and deploying Marines in LA? The second part is, how long will litigation take start to finish?
Yeah, in terms of what can we do, we sued the Trump administration and we secured a temporary restraining order from the district court blocking the unlawful deployment of the National Guard. Of course, again, that went on appeal. We're waiting for the appellate court to issue an opinion, but they have unfortunately stayed, temporarily stopped the order from going into place while the litigation continues. So we await their final order. And in our lawsuit, we argue that the Trump administration's use of the California National Guard and the military troops, that it's illegal, that it creates imminent harm or irreversible harm to California, to our state sovereignty, that it deprives the state of its use of the National Guard, which they were doing important work fighting wildfires and tackling fentanyl flow into our state. It also escalates tensions and promotes rather than quells civil unrest. We made all those points and made that case in our lawsuit. The federalization of California National Guard troops without the governor's consent is illegal. The president is authorized to call the Guard into federal service in only very rare circumstances, like, as the Congressmember mentioned, an invasion or a rebellion, none of which are present here. To put it bluntly, that there's no rebellion in Los Angeles, there's no invasion, and nothing is stopping the president from enforcing the laws through ordinary means, which is another element of the law he relies on. So as to length of the litigation, while we can't predict how long the litigation will take from start to finish, we get orders when we're seeking temporary restraining orders or preliminary injunctions. We've gotten those within hours. We've filed in the morning and we've had them by late morning or by early afternoon. So there's parts of the litigation that take time, and there's parts that move very rapidly. So here again, we were granted the restraining order. The president was blocked from using federalized California National Guard troops, and then the appellate court later stayed that order. We remain confident in the case, believe the law is on our side, and we'll continue to press our case in court.
And we're also grateful for that. I don't know if all of you know, but Congress actually doesn't have standing to sue, meaning even though it's our laws that we pass that are being broken, we actually rely on partners like the Attorney General to be able to bring these suits forward. And that's why it's so great that we have this amazing partnership. In my role on the House Armed Services Committee, I'm doing oversight of the use of Title X, so military forces like the federalized National Guard, like the Marines, trying to figure out, what actual legal authorities they're using. As mentioned, I asked the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who reiterated that there is no invasion in LA, and asking the commandant of the Marine Corps, asking the commander of Northern Command, the person who oversees the Marines in LA, making sure we understand what authorities they're operating under, what rules they're operating under, so that we can be holding them accountable when they don't abide by those, and that we can make sure they know that we're watching and that they do everything exactly by the book. So we're going to keep doing our oversight job and then working with partners like the Attorney General on the lawsuit piece, because again, we can't sue ourselves, frustratingly, because again, it is the laws that Congress has passed, but it's why it's so important we have such a great partnership with the Attorney General's office.
Excellent. Next, a question from Stephen S. Again, Attorney General, building on some of the things you said, he asks, how long will the various lawsuits you mentioned take and what outcomes are expected? What can California do to expedite lawsuits against President Trump?
Right. So some aspects of lawsuits take time. Getting to the final decision sometimes can be months away, but important rulings that pause the unlawful conduct, block the unlawful conduct early can happen very fast. Again, within hours, sometimes the same day. We got a order very quickly blocking the implementation of the revocation of birthright citizenship because it was so blatantly unconstitutional. The court said we're likely to win on the merits and blocked that from going into effect. We also were able to block a attempt to stop the flow of already congressionally appropriated funding to states in the amount of $3 trillion with a T. The president was trying to stop that money from going to the different states. In California, we valued our portion at about 168 billion, and we got an order on that, making sure that money continued to come into California, and we got the money that Congress had decided we should get. So parts of the court cases move fast. Getting to a final decision on all aspects of a case can take a little more time. But the important thing is that when we get the temporary restraining order or the preliminary injunction, the unlawful conduct is stopped. The harm is prevented. And one thing I really want to share is that I know there's a lot of talk about the possibility, or in some other cases, the reality of Trump not following court orders, not following all aspects of a court order. In nearly all of our cases, we have gotten orders against the Trump administration, stopping them from unlawful or unconstitutional actions. And in nearly all those cases, he is following the court orders. There was a time when we needed to move to enforce a court order because it was a really broad order, and there was a disagreement between us and the federal government about whether certain actions were contemplated by the order. We clarified it with the judge. We won, we prevailed, and then they followed the order. So they are, in our cases, broadly following court orders. And again, while we can't predict all outcomes, we sue when we think the facts and the law are on our side and we think we'll win. We don't sue if all we have is political grievance or ideological or policy difference. We follow the law. We follow the facts. We make our case to the court. And so far, we've had a very high level of success, and we hope we can maintain that.
All right, thank you. Arthur M. asks, what will California do when Trump invokes the Insurrection Act?
We've been preparing for this for months, so we're ready. We've looked at the Insurrection Act, what it requires. We don't think that the elements are present for Trump to lawfully invoke the Insurrection Act. We don't think that is a barrier to him invoking it. Why? Because he wants the power that it gives him. So if you listen to his language, Secretary Hegseth, Secretary Noem, Stephen Miller, they're often using words like rebellion, invasion, emergency, insurrection. Why? Because those are required if certain additional authorities are to be given to the executive branch via the Insurrection Act or other Alien Enemies Act, or what was involved in our case, 10 U.S.C. 12406, a statute that requires the presence of an invasion or a rebellion or inability to execute the federal laws. So they like to say that those facts exist in reality when they don't, because they want the authority that the law would give them if those facts actually existed. So we're ready for a lawsuit. What will we do when Trump invokes the Insurrection Act? We'll sue him to block him. We have a strong case to make. The Insurrection Act has been used in the past, but it has typically been used in very different factual circumstances, mostly during the Civil Rights Movement, when individuals, Black Americans, were being deprived of constitutional rights by states. And the Insurrection Act was triggered, and there was a deployment to help maintain those rights and to prevent deprivation of those rights. So we're ready to sue. We don't think the facts exist to justify the Insurrection Act, and we will move quickly to block any invocation of the Insurrection Act.
And I couldn't agree with you more, Attorney General Bonta, that the facts on the ground do not meet the level of the Insurrection Act. It's part of why we've been trying to use our hearings in Congress to get various authority figures on the record saying that, it is not an invasion, it is not a rebellion. They are able to enforce existing law. One of the things I've been working on is through the National Defense Authorization Act, which the Armed Services Committee that I sit on does every year, is trying to figure out if there are ways that we can put in more constraints to the Insurrection Act, put some guardrails into the NDAA. My Republican colleagues will tell me privately that the Insurrection Act, the invocation of the Insurrection Act is a red line for them. We'll see. So far, some of the red lines they've privately told me have come and gone, and we have not heard them say anything. But I'm hoping that my colleagues will start to step up because, when we talk about the constitutional crisis that we're in, it's not only that although as you pointed out, Attorney General Bonta, not all of the court orders are being ignored by the Trump administration, but also that Congress is not standing up for our constitutional role and our constitutional job and is letting the executive branch kind of run roughshod over what should be congressional authorities. And so, we're going to continue working with my Republican colleagues and try and see what we can do through the NDAA and elsewhere to try and constrain some of these, extraordinary powers that the Trump administration and President Trump is going to try and take for himself.
All right. Up next, we have a question from Brenda B. Brenda asks, is the Attorney General working with the University of California to prepare lawsuits if federal research funding is terminated, like at Columbia and Harvard?
We are. We've been in contact with all of our higher education systems with respect to attacks on them, their funding. We appreciate the opportunity to partner. It's an all hands on deck, everyone working together, including us at the California DOJ, working with the University of California. The University of California supported our office's lawsuit against the president when he attempted to unlawfully decimate NIH funding for medical and public health research. And in that case, within hours after we filed, we had a judge issue an order that blocked those cuts. So that was when the system moved very quickly. We got an order that supported the University of California and the preservation of the NIH grants. We also filed an amicus brief in support of Harvard University in their lawsuit challenging the Trump administration's freeze of federal funding for research grants. We think if something like this can be done to Harvard, it can be done to University of California or any other institution of higher education. It's wrong when it comes to Harvard. It's wrong when it would come to anyone else, including our own University of California. So we will stand up for the University of California, protect the funding, work with them. If the president attempts to illegally attack research funding at our higher education institutions further than he already has, we'll take action and we'll go to court. For now, we're continuing to monitor the federal administration's actions closely, and things change every day. There's a lot of threats that we heard might be coming. We think our duty is to be ready, to be prepared immediately, to leap into action, and we will be here as well.
Yeah, and the entire California Democratic delegation is working hard to try and address the threats to the University of California and CSU system and other research funding coming to California that, the president is trying to, withhold because he's mad at California for various reasons. But one of the things I feel like it's important for me to say as the youngest Jewish member of Congress is that, a lot of what President Trump is doing to higher education institutions, whether it's Harvard or I went to Columbia, is in the name of fighting anti-Semitism. And I spend a lot of time talking to students, to Jewish students, and they are not safer. They do not feel safer because of these actions. In fact, they feel less safe. They feel like people are blaming them for the student revocations, for the research funding being cut. And so, if the president really wanted to address anti-Semitism on college campuses, he would increase funding for the Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Education, which is who enforces and investigates instances of anti-Semitism. Instead, he's cutting it by $50 million in his budget, and doing all of these things in the name of making Jewish students safer that are actually making Jewish students less safe.
All right. Beth K asks, what specifically can California do to combat the Trump agenda? Is there anything beyond the lawsuits you mentioned?
Well, thank you. You're seeing what we can do in real time. The lawsuits are absolutely important. And to the questions that were posed earlier, the partnerships are important too. Working with the University of California, working with our congressional partners like Congresswoman Jacobs, working with our constitutional officers, our senators, our mayors. I work very closely with the governor. That's critical, and we need to be immovable and resolute and firm and unapologetic in our commitment to upholding the rule of law, making sure that we have a president that follows the law, that complies with the Constitution. So we will do that. Three things are very important right now. The three C's, we like to say, courts, crowds, and courage. And so courts are very important as a place where you can present facts, present law, and get orders to limit the unlawful overreach and unlawful use of authority by the president. And crowds are really important. That's all of us, everyday people, including the crowds on No King's Day and other mobilizations when people show up and show out and speak up and speak out, and remind our leaders that the people power is more potent than the people in power, and that this is a government of, for, and by the people, and the people will have the first and the last word. This is our democracy. We drive it. We decide what happens next. We reinforce and recommit to the rule of law, our Constitution, our freedoms, our protections. So no matter how exhausting it gets, no matter how anxiety creating, and honestly, sometimes I know for some folks, scary that it can get, it's critical that we stay engaged. Democracies thrive on engagement, participation. They die in the dark with neglect, with apathy. So we have to stay engaged and stay enraged by the president's flagrant abuse of power, show up, continue to call it out. Always remember that democracy is not a spectator sport. It's full contact. We need to be on the field, not on the sidelines. And that means each and every one of you doing what you're doing tonight. I'm preaching to the choir because you're here, you're engaged, you care, you're fighting. You know that we can't accept the unacceptable. You know that we can't normalize what is so abnormal, and that we need to keep pushing and work with our leaders. But you don't need to have positional power like the Congress member and I are honored to have as people with the privilege of being elected to represent and fight for our constituents and our people. Everyone has power, and everyone has a role to play to push back. And I'll just end with this, that California is the largest state in the nation. You know that, nearly 40 million people strong, the fourth largest economy in the world, the most diverse state in the nation. As the world watches and the nation watches about what happens next and who's going to fight and who's going to push back, so many eyes are looking west to us, to California. And I know that when they look here, they will see Congress members and attorneys general and everyday people refusing to accept unlawfulness and unconstitutional actions from the executive branch and fighting. So let's continue to fight, and let's continue to exercise the most potent power that there is, people power.
Thank you so much, Attorney General Bonta. We're conscious of your time. We're so grateful for the 30 minutes that you've spent with us and for all of your thoughtful answers to those questions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, not only for spending time with us, but for leading the fight on so many of these lawsuits and standing up for our values. We couldn't be better represented as a state in those lawsuits. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you all. Thank you, Congress member, and thank you to all the constituents here tonight. We'll continue to fight for you, and we'll always think about you as we tackle all these this onslaught from the Trump administration. But honored to be with you tonight. Keep fighting. Thanks again.
All right, Congresswoman, we will charge forward. So back to you for more
Right.
questions.
Sounds good. Now I don't have anyone to pass off the tough questions to.
All right. A good number of the questions I'm seeing in the queue are about the ICE raids here in San Diego and LA. I know you and the Attorney General discussed those, but is there anything else you'd like to say or want folks to hear on that subject?
No, I think we covered a lot of it. I agree with the Attorney General that this is an unlawful deployment of the troops. I'm doing my oversight job to make sure we are, watching and trying to pull them back as much as possible as we can from DC while we wait for the court cases to go through. I think the other important thing to note is that we know that part of why President Trump sent the National Guard and the Marines is because he wants to instigate chaos. He wants to instigate violence. He wants the escalation so that he can invoke the Insurrection Act. And so it's even more important than ever that we don't take the bait and that we use nonviolent methods to protest. And these protests do work, but that we don't give him what he wants, which is a reason to invoke the Insurrection Act.
All right. The next question, still on the topic of immigration, comes from John P., who asks, why do Democrats not support legal immigration?
Well, actually, Democrats do support legal immigration. I think it's kind of wild, actually. We haven't had real reform to our immigration policy since before I was born. And while I'm young, I'm not that young. And what we're seeing right now is clearly not the answer, right? When I talk to everyone, um, they understand that in order to have a more orderly process, you need more legal pathways to immigrate so that you can actually screen everyone, that you can have a process that actually works, you can get it quickly. And the problem is that because we haven't changed or fixed those legal pathways in 40 years, we don't actually have the structures in place for what our economy needs, what our society needs, what our communities need. And so, to me, it's incredibly important that we get to a comprehensive immigration policy that increases the legal pathways. That's the only real way that we can get to an orderly approach to immigration. And let's be clear, what we're seeing right now is not the answer. And I know my Republican colleagues like to say that they care a lot about immigration, they care a lot about the border, but the fact of the matter is they've not actually offered us any legislation on this topic that would actually solve the problem. And I think that speaks for itself.
All right. More on the topic of immigration. This next one is more of a comment than a question, but I'll go ahead and read it. Bob D writes, please inspect immigrant detention centers in the area, as is your right as a member of Congress. Obviously not a question, but is there anything you'd like to say in response to Bob there?
Yeah, absolutely, Bob. Thank you for bringing this up. First of all, we are working as the San Diego congressional delegation to work on a detention center visit. So more on that soon. Stay tuned. But I think it's important to note that it is not just our right to inspect, it is literally in law, in statute, that members of Congress have the right to show up to any ICE detention facility without notice and must be allowed in. And obviously, we are seeing that that is not actually what DHS and ICE is doing across the country. And this is incredibly concerning because, again, this is not just like something we think we have the right to do. Like, it is literally written in statute, in law. And so we're going to keep doing our oversight job. We're going to keep showing up, and we'll have more on a specific visit of our delegation in our area very soon.
Okay, changing subjects a bit here. James B asks, what can we do to stop Trump's budget from cutting USAID funding and the United States' contribution to the Global Fund?
Well, it's a really good question. And it's something I'm really concerned about. Obviously, we saw the rescissions package that's going through the Senate right now. For those of you who don't know what rescissions is, that it would be normal because I'm pretty sure Congress made up this word. But rescissions is basically when Congress has appropriated or approved funding and then we pass a new bill, a rescission, and claw it back. So in the rescissions bill, they had these huge cuts to USAID, to other global health funding, and this is going to continue being a fight in the upcoming appropriations budget. And this is another area where many of my Republican colleagues will privately tell me that they support foreign assistance, they support foreign aid, but at the end of the day, they haven't really been willing to step up and publicly stop this. And we only need for Republicans working with us to be able to stop these cuts. And so that's where I'm actually going to ask all of you to help me, because the more we can explain why these programs are important, there's a lot of misinformation about foreign assistance, right? People think it's some huge portion of our budget. It's less than 1% of our budget. And it's not just about, doing the morally right thing, although I do think it's the morally right thing, but these kinds of investments actually are important for American safety, American security, American public health. And so for those of you in the district who I know care about this issue and have a lot of knowledge and experience in it, please make sure to tell your stories, talk to your friends and neighbors, because the more we can help people understand what this funding actually is and what it's going towards, I think the better we'll be able to help protect it.
All right. Charles F. asks, do you agree with Congressman Khanna, that's Ro Khanna from Northern California, do you agree with Congressman Khanna's bill to tax billionaires?
Thank you for the question. I think he just introduced the bill like a week ago, so I'll be honest, I haven't had a chance to read every section of it. And the devil is always in the details on this kind of thing, but on the face of it, yes, I think we need to tax wealthy people more. Many of you know my family has been very lucky, very fortunate. I'm not actually a billionaire, but I do think we should tax rich people like me more. We should be making sure people pay their fair share. And right now that's not the case. And the Republican tax budget that's going forward actually is going to cut taxes for wealthy people even more, and then cut services like Medicaid that we know so many people rely on, and expand the deficit and make the country go further into $3 to $4 trillion more into debt. So yeah, I absolutely think that the number one thing we can be doing is making sure that we are creating a tax system that actually makes sense, which to me means taxing wealthy people more so that we can provide sort of the social services and make the investments that we know are important to make, right? We know quality early childhood investments in that actually save the federal government $6 for every $1 we invest. We know that spending money on preventative medicine, like primary care medicine, like Medicaid, saves the government $12 for every $1 we invest. These are the kinds of investments we need to be making, and we need to pay for them by making the wealthy and big corporations pay their fair share.
All right. I just have initials for this next one, but JY asks, how are the Dems preparing to talk to people like myself? You must realize, quote, Trump bad man is not enough.
JY, I could not agree with you more. Look, when I was talking to people before the election, it wasn't enough, right? The Democratic Party has, in a lot of people's minds, become the party of the status quo. And, I'm one of the youngest members of Congress. I spend a lot of time talking to people my own age and younger. And, one of the things I heard a lot was, things are really hard for me right now, and I feel like a vote for the Democrats is a vote for the status quo. And so I don't know, I don't really like what Trump stands for, but at least maybe it will change. And I think it's important that we recognize that for a lot of people, the status quo really doesn't work. And we can't just keep using the same slogans and the same policies that we've been talking about for 30 years because our economy has changed. We need to rebuild trust and faith in government. And a lot of that is by actually acknowledging what people are going through and then having real solutions that are actually going to address it. And that involves having a proactive agenda on things like housing and childcare and so many of the things that I hear from you all every day about, what's impacting our communities, and showing that like we understand and we actually have real plans. And if you put us in power, we will do them and your life will get better.
Alrighty. Joan R. asks, this is back to LA a bit. How are you supporting the military that is being required to respond to the protests in LA who may disagree with the force upon us?
It's a really good question. And part of my concern about what's happening with the Marine deployment is that we're putting these young Marines in a really difficult position because they were trained to be the most lethal fighting force. And now we've given them 4 days of training and asked them to do non-lethal crowd control. Like, this is not what they were trained to do. It's not what they're specialized in. And so I actually, when I had the Commandant of the Marine Corps in front of the Armed Services Committee last week or the week before, I can't remember which one, I asked him, what happens if a Marine is given an order or a request that they believe is unlawful, either because it's conducting domestic law enforcement, which they're not allowed to do, or some other thing, right? You've got DHS giving requests, so they don't always know exactly the rules of what the military is and isn't allowed to be used for. And they gave me an answer. They're having lawyers there. They have a chain of command, but I think it just goes to the point why it makes absolutely no sense to send our Marines on this mission. DoD won't say what authority they're operating under. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs reaffirmed to me last week that there's no invasion in LA. And to me, this is just Trump using our Marines to provocate. And frankly, our Marines deserve better than that from their commander in chief.
Okay, Patricia E. asks another very topical question. Are we about to get into another war? I'm terrified about what I'm seeing in the Middle East right now.
Patricia, I too am terrified by what we're seeing, and incredibly concerned by what we're seeing. I wish I could tell you that we're not. I don't think we should. But the fact of the matter is, this is why it's so scary to have a president like Donald Trump in office, because I don't know what he's going to do. I'm not sure he knows what he's going to do. I'm not sure his advisors know what he's going to do. And that makes this situation even more volatile than it otherwise would be. And so I think it's important that we get to a de-escalation immediately. Um, Many of you know I have family who lives in Israel. My family is literally in the bomb shelter right now in Israel. This is not good for civilians in Israel. It's not good for civilians in Iran. It doesn't make Israel any safer. And I think before you get into, many of you know my background is in international conflict resolution and in international security policy. All war happens under the shadow of negotiation, right? Like, if you are going to get into this conflict, you need to know what end state you're hoping to get to. And I just don't see a real answer about that from the Netanyahu administration or the Trump administration, right? Like, the Netanyahu administration has at times talked about regime change being their goal. Well, regime change in Iran, no matter what you think of the Iranian regime, which I do not think they're not good, but if you try and topple the regime and then leave a vacuum, it's not going to make the Middle East more stable. It's going to make it less stable. It's going to be a really volatile, unstable situation. We saw that in Iraq. We saw that in Afghanistan. We saw it in Libya, right? Like, you can't just go in and topple a regime and think that's going to solve your problems. And so I'm really concerned that actually we haven't seen clearly what an end state is that they're aiming for. to me, the only way we're going to be able to get out of this is a negotiated settlement. I think that's really important. That's how almost every war ends. And that's what we should be driving towards. And the United States should not be dragged into another war. President Trump campaigned on being the peace president, right? On understanding that we'd been in the forever wars and he didn't want to do it anymore. And yet now he might be making a decision that's going to drag us right into another war in the Middle East, which is why I'm an original co-sponsor of a war powers resolution that was just introduced in the House that says that, well, reiterates constitutionally, it is Congress who is the only ones who have the authority to declare war, and that that the current authorizations that exist do not currently give the president the authority to strike Iran without coming back to Congress. And we in San Diego, we're the biggest military community in the country. We understand better than most the human cost of war. My generation understands better than most the human cost of war. We shouldn't do it again, and we certainly shouldn't do it if we have no clear understanding of why we're doing or what end state we're trying to get to.
Okay. Melanie H. is up next, who asks, what specific result can you point to that shows there is bipartisan action in Congress against unlawful dictates?
Melanie, I wish I could point to something and tell you what it was. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist. It's incredibly frustrating because, as I've said, my Republican colleagues will tell me privately that they are very concerned about what's happening, that they have these red lines, some of which have already been crossed, and yet these red lines have come and gone and they haven't said anything. So, I've been encouraging them that it's not enough to disagree with Trump privately. They also need to be speaking out publicly. Like, these are constitutional questions. These are questions that are important for the future of our country. And it is up to Congress to reassert our authority per the Constitution to be the first among equals of a co-equal branch of government. And so, I've been working to see what we can get done through the National Defense Authorization Act. I've introduced a number of bills like the Delete Doge Act and the Protecting U.S. National Security Act that would protect USAID. There's a lot of levers we have that Congress could enact if we got 4 Republicans to work with us to do that. But so far, while they privately will tell me they are unhappy, they've been unwilling to do anything public about that.
Okay. We are also live on Facebook right now, so I am going to take a couple of questions from Facebook. Becky asks, why can't Trump be impeached?
Becky, it's a really good question, and I know it's on a lot of people's minds because I think to many of us, myself included, the threshold of high crimes and misdemeanors has been reached, right? Ignoring congressional law, ignoring court orders, those are all, in my mind, high crimes and misdemeanors. The the corruption that we're seeing, etc. Unfortunately, being in both the minority in the House and the Senate, we know that any impeachment right now would not actually go forward. And while if an impeachment bill came to the floor, I would vote for it, I do worry that a failed impeachment is actually worse than no impeachment at all. Because I think what we saw the last 2 times we impeached him, and impeaching Donald Trump was actually one of my first votes in Congress. But when he got acquitted by the Senate, I think it only further emboldened him to do what he was doing because he felt like there were no consequences. And so, I think we need to be really strategic about how we use this tool and make sure that, that phrase, like, if you come at the king, you best not miss, right? Like, we need to make sure that we pick strategically when and how we try and do an impeachment so that we are successful.
Okay. Also from Facebook, Keith H. asks, what is being done at the local level, to address the Tijuana River crisis?
Keith, it's a really good question, and this has been an issue in San Diego since, well, my entire life, actually. I remember hearing about this growing up in San Diego. So I'm really proud that our San Diego congressional delegation has been able to bring over $650 million in federal funding to address this crisis. And basically what this funding would do is that right now the South Bay wastewater treatment plant, right now it's pretty broken, and also even at max could only take 25 mgds of sewage and process it. And so what this funding will do is it will renovate and fix and increase the capacity so that it can do 50 and can also peak up to 75 as needed. And that will enable us to double, and in some cases more than that, the capacity of sewage that we can treat on our side of the border. And that's really important, but we know it's not the only solution, because of the fact of the matter is the infrastructure in Tijuana has just not kept up with the growth of the city of Tijuana. And at the end of the day, the only real way to solve this problem is to get the Mexicans to invest in the infrastructure in Tijuana so that they can actually treat all of the sewage that they need to that's coming from the city of Tijuana. And, I went out and visited their new sewage treatment plant, San Antonio de las Buenas, which they is now up and running. We've been working with them closely to get them to make these investments. The new president there seems very eager and willing to do this, but it's going to take partnership on both sides of the border. But I am glad that, for the first time in a long time, we are making very real progress, and we now have the funding allocated and ready, and the construction should be starting soon on the South Bay wastewater treatment plant renovation, which will be a really important part of getting this issue addressed.
All right. Back to immigration a bit. Timothy B asks, why did you not stand up to Biden's open border policy?
Well, I guess I would disagree with the fact that Biden had an open border policy. I certainly don't support open borders. What I do support is people having the legal right, which is legal under both domestic and international law, to seek asylum when they are persecuted for their identity from the country that they're in. And this is really important to me as a Jewish American, because these international asylum and refugee laws, they were put in place literally because when Jews were fleeing Germany during the Holocaust, they got turned away from almost every country. And that's why we put in place this international system that says that you have the legal right to seek asylum if you feel like your life is in danger. And I think it's important that we uphold that, both, for our values, but, learning our history. Now, that doesn't mean that we should have an open border, nor do I think we should have an open border. We need to support border communities like ours in San Diego. We know that it's really important to have transit across the border, right? Many people live in San Diego, work in TJ, live in TJ, work in San Diego. It's very fluid across the border. So we need to invest in more technology to make sure that we can actually get those people and goods flowing as quickly as possible. And then we need more legal pathways so that we have more orderly processes to make sure we're getting the people into our country that we need for our community and our society, and we're able to vet all of them while still maintaining the right to asylum, which is legal and which I think is really important.
Okay. Staying on this topic slightly, question from Zoom, is it legal for ICE to not identify themselves?
It is not. If an ICE officer refuses to identify themselves, you have the right to ask for their ID and to refuse to cooperate until they comply. There is information on my website, sarajacobs.house.gov/immigration, where you that tells you what your rights are, to know your rights. But some of the things that are important is that you do not need to open a door for anyone if they do not have a judicial warrant. You are not required to respond to answers without legal counsel. Um, and it's important that, you make sure that when they say they have a warrant, it's a warrant signed by a judge, a judicial warrant. And you have the right to remain silent. You have the right to counsel, right? All of these things. We have it all on my website. There's also a number of organizations here in San Diego that are doing workshops to make sure people know their rights. But please do make sure you know all of them, because once you open a door, for instance, then they can do more. Then you're letting them in. And so making sure you understand all of your rights ahead of time is really, really important.
All right, Lydia B asks, what are we going to do about fixing the firing of Social Security employees? Can anything be done?
Yes. So, I kind of wish Attorney General Bonta was still on, because he's part of some of these, but there are many lawsuits that are working their way through the courts right now. The Supreme Court has paused the preliminary injunctions, meaning some of these firings are still going forward, even though the lower courts had stopped them. So, as I mentioned earlier, Congress doesn't have the standing to sue. We're working with outside partners like Attorney General Bonta for these lawsuits. We are looking in our, congressional duty if there's anything we can do legislatively. So far, again, we need 4 Republicans to work with us to be able to do that. But the most important thing all of us can do is make our voices heard, because a lot of people who rely on Social Security maybe live in Republican congressional districts, maybe voted for Republicans or Donald Trump. And I think the more that we can help explain that these are not just numbers on a spreadsheet or like a nameless, faceless bureaucrats in a big gray building in Washington, D.C., but like real people who rely on these programs, I think the better able we are to push back and to try and stop some of these things from happening, like the firing of Social Security workers.
All right. I'm looking at the clock, and I think that was probably our final question. Appreciate everyone who submitted them both here in Zoom and pre-submitted and on Facebook. Congresswoman Jacobs, any final thoughts you want to share?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you all for joining us tonight. I hope this was helpful. I learned a lot from Attorney General Bonta, so I hope you all did too. I know we weren't able to get through everyone's questions. If you submitted your questions and gave us a way to be in touch, then we will work on getting responses to everyone. If you would like, you can also go to sarajacobs.house.gov, no H on Sarah, and submit an email or a question that way, and we will get you an answer. Or, of course, you can call my office, 619-280-5353. I hope you'll also sign up for my newsletter, because we try and give out information as much as possible and really try and keep you informed. And follow me on all the social medias at Rep Sara Jacobs. Again, no H on the Sarah. And then I hope that I will see a lot of you at our next town hall, which will be the last week of July in person. And we will make sure we get those updates out to all of you. So thank you all again so much for joining me. Thanks for spending an hour of a beautiful Wednesday here in San Diego with me and Attorney General Bonta. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. And this is really what showing up looks like. This is, a lot of people I know are sitting at home wondering what they can do, and you all are doing it. You showed up, you made your voices heard, you asked questions of your elected officials, you stayed in community, and that's what we need to be doing now more than ever. So thanks all so much.
Great. Thank you all again. As the Congresswoman said, our next town hall will be in late July. Look out for updates on the Congresswoman's social media, or you can visit our website, sarajacobs.house.gov/town-halls for more information. Good night, everyone.